All right. So most of you know Peter. He's our youth pastor. For those of you who don't, I have quite a history with Peter. When he was in junior high and I was a camp counselor, he was one of my campers. And I actually lived with his family in Colorado for a couple years. His parents are church planters. But I was able to get him to come here to be on staff. Actually, when I met him a long time ago, I thought, this is a man who's called into ministry. And so when we were looking, I thought, I'm going to give Peter a call. Twofold. Number one, help him to grow into his calling as a minister of the gospel. But number two, I have so much payback to give to him. And now that he works for me, I can do that absolutely freely. Anyways, I hope that's encouraging, Peter. So with that, hey, can we just praise God and encourage Peter as he comes forward to bring the word of God?
Oh, thanks, man. I'm going to move this just really quickly out of the way. Yeah, it is true, actually. And I think more than encouraging, it's just warranted. The payback that I get on a daily basis. I was one of his first cabins he had when he was a camp counselor. And I was probably one of the worst ones he ever had, too. I had a lot of energy. People have told me throughout my life I have no filter. I would actually like to get that out of the way. I actually do have a filter, and if people knew how many things I filtered before they came out of my mouth, they would have a lot more respect for the work I go through on a given day. It's tiring. When you have all these things that are almost out and you just have to pull them back all the time, man, it gets old. So I appreciate that Greg. It's actually true. I think that Greg did see something and he called, and the part of the story he left out was when he called, he asked me if I was interested, and I just told him straight up on the phone. I said no. I said, I'm not interested. Please don't call back, and please add me to your do not call list. But he called back, and he asked me to pray, and I said no. Well, actually, that's not true. I said yes, and in my heart, I said no and refused to pray. And then eventually, God won, and by virtue, you guys either all won or lost. You can decide if you are the winners or losers in this deal. I'm not going to make that judgment call, but I'm here. So, and it's a privilege to be here, and I'm excited for today, just for two things. The first one, actually, like Greg said, my parents are coming in today. So they're not here yet, but I've been here for about 7 months. Actually, we're going on 7 months. 7 months on Tuesday, I've been in Turlock, so that's exciting. And since I've been here, I've had a few friends come and visit, and that's been really neat, but I haven't had anybody in my family come out and see. I like to refer to Turlock as T-Town. I just think that it gives it a little bit more kick, because everybody thinks Turlock's lame, because there's not very much to do in Turlock. And so when you say, you know what, T-Town's not as bad as you think, it immediately makes people reassess Turlock in a different light. So I'll probably tell my parents that when we're driving in, or maybe I'll wait until they don't like it, and then I'll bust out T-Town to try to change their mind. But the other reason that I'm excited is I'm just excited to be up here this morning. It's stretching for sure, but it's an exciting thing. And I think you guys should be excited too, and the reason for that is, we already talked about it, I have no filter. That's not true. I have a filter, just stuff gets through it anyway. So you have no idea what's going to come out of my mouth over the course of the next, hopefully 20 minutes, but who knows how long. So I'm just glad you guys are here. So for those of you who have been at Cornerstone for a while, or those of you who have just been here for a few weeks, we are currently going through a series on Luke. And we started at the beginning, back Luke chapter 1, verse 1, and that was probably a year ago. When you go through Luke slowly, it takes a long time. And we're getting towards the end. And last week we looked at this scene where Pilate is basically interrogating Jesus. Who are you? What's going on here? And then we see this really interesting switch happen. And Greg talked about this, right? And the cool thing about going through a book of the Bible all the way from the beginning to the end is things that maybe for some of us, if we haven't read the Bible very much, we're like, all right, there's this dude named Jesus, and he's in front of Pilate, and he's getting asked questions, and now there's a prisoner, and they're switching, and it doesn't really make sense. I'm just going to keep reading and get to the good stuff because this doesn't seem to matter. And so we if we don't know what's going on, we tune it out. And on the other end of the spectrum, if we've been reading the Bible our whole life, maybe we were just born into the church, right? We don't remember our lives without the Bible part of it. We read those things and we gloss over. And that was me last week, actually. As Greg was preaching, it was pretty straightforward. All right, who's interrogating Jesus? It's Pilate. I got this one. Ask me a harder question. All right, next question. Who brought him there? The teachers of the law. You thought you were going to have me. It wasn't just the Pharisees. It's more than that. There's more people that brought Jesus before it. And then what happened? And then I got the answer again. Well, there was this weird trade, and we saw Pilate was asking Jesus some questions about who he was, and then he found him innocent, and then all of a sudden Pilate decided that he didn't want to kill Jesus, but the Jews wanted to kill Jesus, and Pilate didn't want to be mean to the Jews like he used to be, so he decided to let Jesus go. Boom. I have all the answers. I heard this story, but man, I was so glossed over. And then Greg got to that point where so good, where he pointed out Barabbas. and who Barabbas kind of symbolized and what Barabbas signified in Jesus. And I think we hear a lot about Jesus and what Jesus signifies, but we don't necessarily realize that switch that was taking place. And when we look at the scriptures as a whole, we see this story of Barabbas, right? And this prisoner, this person who has fallen out from the graces of society, who maybe hasn't made the best choices along the way, who maybe has slipped, who maybe hasn't been the best dad, hasn't been the best husband, hasn't been the best brother, hasn't been the best employee. And he ends up in this prison. Actually, Barabbas committed murder, but we can't relate to that as well, so I'm not going to talk about murder. Come on, people. All right. So Barabbas has found himself in prison, right? And he's in prison, and as Greg talked about, there's the manhole, and they pull it up, and you get a little bit of light. Maybe they throw some food in, and you're literally underground with no light, with no hope, in your own crap, and you never know if you're going to get a trial, and you never know if you're going to get a second chance. And there's this story in the Bible that we don't understand and don't take the time to dive into. A lot of the time, I don't. And we just see Jesus say, you know what, maybe that's where you were, maybe you are underground, maybe you are down there, but when we start to call ourselves Christians, when we actually live into the life that God has for us, when we engage and put our hope and our trust in God, for those of us that are Christians, the exchange has taken place. We aren't down there anymore. Jesus brought us up. And it's cool, right? Something like that we read, we just miss. So this morning, we're not going to talk about Luke at all. This morning, we're going to take a step back from Luke. And like Greg mentioned, I'm the youth pastor. And in the youth group, we've been doing a series on wisdom. A couple months back, I was listening to a sermon by Andy Stanley. And he was talking about wisdom, and he gave reference to a Taylor Swift lyric. And this light bulb just went on in my head, and I was like, man, we could do a whole series on wisdom according to Taylor Swift. Yeah, and some of you guys are like, that's not a light bulb, that's a dim spot. But I'm telling you, it was a light bulb. And it's been awesome. And so what we've been going through, and there's these 4 people that we see present in the book of Proverbs, right? We see the simple, and the simple they're just simple, right? They just don't know better. And we looked at the song 15 by Taylor Swift. Because when you're 15 and somebody tells you they love you, does anybody know it? You're going to believe them. Does nobody know? I know some of you over here have Taylor Swift on your iPod and you just don't want to fess up. This group for sure does. Don't check my playlist. I don't have any of it. I have all of it. And so we have the simple, right? And it's just those who don't know better. You haven't lived. You don't have the experience. You haven't seen that. The simple. And then we have the next person, and the fool. And the fool is those who know better, but still choose to not do it. We know what we should do, and yet we don't. We climb back into the pit, right? We know how to get out of the pit, and we just decide to climb in. And then there's one step further. We have the mocker. And the mockers are tough. And yet sometimes, I think in our lives, we all play the fool sometimes. In some area, in some way, we all play the fool. For each of you, I don't need to tell you what it is. You know. I know where my fool is. You don't want to hear about it. But we all play the mockers sometimes, too. And that's a little worse because they know what's right, and they don't do it. And not only do they not do it, they make fun of and scoff at those who do. And so it takes it one step further, right? So you have the simple who just don't know. You have the fool who know but don't care. And you have the mocker who knows, doesn't care, and doesn't care enough to make sure those who kind of care don't care anymore, right? And so the mocker is a bad place to find ourselves. And if you feel like you're the mocker, I mean, there's always hope, right? But it's a tough place. And I found, as I was preparing to preach this, all these areas that I play the mocker without knowing it. And it's hard. But then there's this 4th type of persons. We have the simple, the fool, the wise, or the mocker, there it is. And then we have the wise. And the wise are those who know better and do better. Simply put, the wise are those who know better and act accordingly. If you know what you shouldn't do, then don't do it. If you want to be the fool, you can know what you shouldn't do and you can do it anyway. You're one step away from being simple. You're still making the wrong choice. It doesn't really help you. But if you know what you should do and then you do it, you started to live into wisdom. So we've been going through and we've been talking about these 4 types of people, and each week we take a different Taylor Swift song and we go through, and eventually we're going to listen to the song Trouble. I knew you were trouble when you walked in, so shame on me, and now I'm lying on the cold, hard ground. I mean, we see where it's going, right? Man, you guys got to listen to Taylor Swift. I'll tell you what, you'll be in a better mood. A, because you'll feel better about the decisions you're making, and B, because she's got catchy tunes. So just saying, shameless plug. And actually, if you're going to you're going to listen to music, Taylor Swift's not a bad choice. She's not a mocker. When she sings, she's not a mocker. She's not talking about drugs and going out there and killing people and whatever else people sing about. I don't listen to that stuff very often. All right. But that being said, this morning, we actually are just going to dive a little bit into the book of Proverbs. We've been going through wisdom, and so for two reasons. One, because I just think wisdom's amazing. And it's kind of funny. It was funny for me as I was thinking about preaching on this. There's that saying, wisdom beyond one's years, right? And I look around at this room, and I don't feel like I am the most qualified based on years or anything else to be speaking on wisdom. And yet that's what God put on my heart, and that's what we have for this morning. So we're going to look at the book of Proverbs. So if you guys have a Bible, go ahead and pull that out. If you don't have a Bible, you can look for a Bible in the chair in front of you. And now here's what's going to happen. Every week we tell you guys to reach for the Bible in front of you. And if you've been here a while, you now know that you only want to pull out the red book in front of you. Because if you pull out the blue book, you're going to think that you've won the Bible lottery, but in fact you haven't. You've pulled out a hymnal. And everyone around you is going to, there you go, I saw somebody over there. You pulled a hymnal, didn't you? Yeah, it's exactly what happens. And you don't have it, so you pull out the hymnal and you're like, dang, I don't have a Bible. But the good news is actually, if you don't have the Bible, you can pull out your phone. And you can use YouVersion or some other Bible app. YouVersion's a really good Bible app, actually. I recommend putting that on your phone. And if you do that, you can. The good thing is you can switch between the Bible and maybe texting your brother or your girlfriend or whoever you want to text that's not here. And you can even live tweet the whole sermon if you want. And no one will know because you're just on your phone. I told you to pull it out. Oh my gosh, you guys are tough. All right, let's just read the word. All right, Proverbs chapter 9. We're gonna start in verse 1. Wisdom has built her house. She has carved its 7 columns. She has prepared a great banquet, mixed the wines and set the table. She has sent her servants to invite everyone to come. She calls out from the heights overlooking the city. Come in with me, she urges the simple. To those who lack good judgment, she says, come, eat my food and drink the wine that I have mixed. Leave your simple ways behind and begin to live. Learn to use good judgment. So we'll come back to that in a sec. So there's two different people that we see personified in this text. So wisdom, what we just read, is one. And we see how the wise person prepares, lives their life, how wisdom calls out to us, right? We're going to look at woman folly here in a second too. And it's really interesting to see how they make very similar appeals, right? And I think that as we read this text, at least as I was reading this text, I enter into it as the simple. In verse 4, we see Lady Wisdom, come in with me, she urges the simple, to those who lack good judgment. And so I think when I read this, I put myself in there as the simple. Because there's things in life that come our way that we haven't dealt with. There's things in life that we enter into and we don't know what the outcome is going to be, or we haven't thought about what the outcome is going to be, which in my mind would make us simple. We just don't know any better. We're still 15. We still think that they actually love us. We have no idea, right? And it's not a bad thing. It's not that we're intending to do wrong. It's just that we don't know any better. And so we have Lady Wisdom, though. We have Lady Wisdom, and she goes out, and this is what we see about Lady Wisdom. She goes and she hews 7 pillars. I don't know if you know what that means. That either means that she carved 7 stone pillars or that she fell a bunch of trees and then made them into pillars. Either way, not something any of us are going to do in this room without a little bit of work. Making pillars, you might as well block out some time. You better look ahead. You better be intentional, or you're not going to have a house that stands. So she makes pillars. She mixes her wine. She prepares a food. She sets the table. And then it says that she goes out to the highest point. She wants to have a hearing, right? She wants people to see what's going on. So she goes to the highest point and calls out. Those who are simple, come in. Eat the food I have prepared. I've looked forward. I knew I was going to come and call out to you. I knew, you simple people, that I was going to ask you to come here. So I mixed the wine. I made the food. I set the table. Come on. She calls out. And then we see, if we decide to listen to Lady Wisdom, and man, this is just so encouraging. We come in, we eat the food, we have the wine that she's mixing in. Verse 6, leave your simple ways behind and begin to live. Learn to use good judgment. A lot of the other translations say walk in the way of understanding, which if you walk in the way of understanding, you are learning to use good judgment, right? But that idea that it's something that then takes root in our lives. And with each step that we're taking as we continue to live our lives, because the lives that we live will be lived. Decisions will be made. Choices will happen. And so the lives that we live, let's live them. Let's learn to live and leave our simple ways behind, which is so cool. It's so cool to think about that invitation that we have. But now, so we have us, who so often in our lives, we're the simple. We're the simple. We just don't really know. We didn't expect it to go out. We didn't expect it to play out that way. Maybe something in our lives happened. We look back and we think, I never saw that coming. It's because we were still simple. We didn't realize what was going to happen when we did that, right? And so we as the simple, we have wisdom calling out to us over here, but then we also have this other woman. We have woman Folly who also calls out to us. So let's look at verse 13 now. Let's jump down chapter 9, verse 13. The woman named Folly is brash. That sounds like my type of girl. She's ignorant and doesn't know it. Count me in. Yeah, sign me up. If you have anybody like that, just send them my way. She sits in her doorway on the heights overlooking the city. Okay. So we had Lady Wisdom, who was making pillars, who was preparing a meal, who was mixing wine. Brash, ignorant, sitting in a doorway. Which way should we go? They call out. It gets better. She calls out to the men who are minding their own business. Come in with me, she urges the simple. To those who lack good judgment, she says. Verse 16, we've already seen that. It's the same as verse 4. It's the same exact verse as verse 4. Woman Wisdom, when she gets to the high places, she calls out. Woman Folly, when she gets to the high places, she calls out. And their appeal is the same. The appeal is exactly the same. Hey, if you're simple, if you need to know what to do, if you're looking to make a decision, if you're living your life, if you want to be free, who are you going to listen to? You who are simple. Come in with me, she urges the simple. To those who lack good judgment, she says, stolen water is refreshing, and food eaten in secret tastes the best. Stolen water is refreshing, and food eaten in secret tastes the best. Now let's think about that for a moment. It's actually true. Stolen water is sweet. She's not telling us something that we haven't experienced in our life. When you drink of the stolen water, when you eat food in secret, there is something that's sweet about it. There is something that's delicious. That is absolutely true. Let's look at verse 18. But little do they know that the dead are there, and her guests are in the depths of the grave. And so we see this, right? If we listen to wisdom, we live. We're set free. We learn to walk in the way of understanding. If we live and listen to folly, yeah, the water tastes sweet. It was nice to take credit for the coworker's idea. It was nice to get away with whatever they didn't know about. But eventually, it leads us to death. It can be satisfying in the moment, but think back to those moments in life when it was tasted so sweet, but you knew you were drinking stolen water. You knew that you were eating food in secret. It was delicious, but chances are it led to death. Chances are. So, we find ourselves stuck in between these two. Both prepare. One prepares with intentionality, with the long run in mind. The other prepares by being ignorant, brash, and sitting around, but both are doing something before they call out. Then they both go out to the highest place to get a hearing from the people, and they call out the same way, and they call out, hey, have the feast, because I've prepared something. I have nothing to offer you, but you can have stolen water. It'll be sweet for a minute, and then you'll have to deal with it. And then at the end, the choice that we ultimately make, do we learn to live, and do we learn to walk in the way of understanding? Or do we learn to die? And do we learn to lower ourselves back down into the pit? I think is maybe the best way to look at it. Because we see as Christians, if we claim to be Christians, for those of us in the room that are following God, Jesus, that exchange has taken place. We don't live down here anymore. We don't have to live underground with no light, with no hope, amongst our own crap, literally, symbolically, whatever it looks like. It's been the great exchange has taken place, but sometimes I think that when we don't choose wisdom, and we'll unpack that just a little bit more before we end. When we don't choose wisdom, it feels like we're back underground. It just feels like we've put ourselves back in the pit. And that's hard. Because how do you get out? And the good news is that the exchange actually has happened, right? And that the woman wisdom continues to call out, and woman folly continues to call out. And as we live our simple lives, maybe rather than having to indulge in folly and tasting this and have the sweet water that ends up just killing us, maybe we can learn to listen to wisdom a little bit quicker. Maybe we can gain a little bit of the foresight that wisdom has. Maybe we can start to prepare. And so as we close, I think there's a few ways, there's two things that really stand out to me for how we actually start to embrace wisdom. And these things are actually found right here in the middle of chapter 9. It's right what we skipped over. So if we look at chapter 9, verse 10, fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One results in good judgment. Because we can talk in human terms all we want. Make the wise choice for 5 years from now, from 10 years from now. But if we are actually actively seeking God, that means that we're embracing the reality that there is a spiritual realm beyond what we're living in right now. And that means that when we come to the end of the line, there's something that's different. And so fear of the Lord wisdom begins with fear of the Lord. And now fear of the Lord is this really odd, kind of ambiguous term that when you're a child you don't really like, and when you're an adult I don't really understand. Maybe some of you completely get this. But what I have found to be a really helpful definition of fear of the Lord is this: that to fear the Lord means to live our lives as if God is not deaf and God is not blind. To fear the Lord means we start to live our lives like God is not deaf and God is not blind. Because when we start to do that, that means we're looking more than 5 years down the road. We're looking more than 10 years down the road. We're looking more than 100 years down the road. We are preparing to live the lives now, to learn to walk in understanding by viewing God, by looking to Him, ultimately down the line, but also right here. And when we start to make our decisions informed by, do I want stolen water today, man? It's a Tuesday at 3 p.m. I think God is blind for the next 12 minutes. You know? It doesn't work like that. So the first one, verse 10, is fear the Lord. Wisdom begins with a healthy fear of the Lord, a healthy understanding and realization that in this world, God is not deaf and God is not blind. And the second is this, again, found in the middle of chapter 9. We're just going to read verses 7 through 9 really quick, and then there's something that stood out to me with those. Anyone who rebukes a mocker will get an insult in return. Anyone who corrects the wicked will get hurt. So don't bother correcting mockers. They will only hate you. But correct the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be even wiser. Teach the righteous, and they will learn even more. And so right here, we see this interesting thing, right? We start out seeing how wisdom calls out to us, and that there's a preparedness, and there's a looking forward. And then we end up over here where woman folly is calling out to us, and she just sits in a doorway and yells. And in between those two bookends, we see these verses about instruction, correcting, which really, it just means, are we willing to listen to counsel? Are we willing to listen to counsel? And if you look at the book of Proverbs, the number one topic actually in the book of Proverbs is about counsel. It's about listening. It's about, are you going to let somebody else inform it? Which is funny. Solomon, who is said to be the wisest man who ever lived, behind Jesus, making him the second wisest man who's ever lived, the thing that he wrote about most as the second wisest man who ever lived was the need to listen to others, the need to let others in, the need for counsel. And so, guys, when so often we feel like we end up back in this pit, we end up with no light, we feel like we're just back in our own crap, we know that we've been set free, we get that Jesus has done the exchange. Listen to counsel. Invite others in. begin to fear the Lord. He's not deaf. He's not blind. He is gracious and he is good. And we will learn to live. Let's pray. Jesus, I just thank you for the encouragement that's found here. I know that so often, God, I make decisions and I just feel like I've lowered myself 10 feet down again. And I don't know how I'm going to get out, and I don't know what it's going to look like. I know that I don't have the focus or the perspective or the self-control to pull myself out of the pit, to start listening to wisdom instead of folly. And so, God, I thank you for in James 1:5 where you say that if any of us lack wisdom, we should simply ask you, because you generously give it without finding fault, and that you'll give wisdom to each of us. And so, God, we come before you this morning, and I just ask that as we listen and as we think, that if we need to have counsel enter into our lives, that you give us courage, that you give us the courage to invite the people in that can actually help us get away from our folly, that can actually help us start to live a life worth living. And God, I pray that you change our perspective, that we stop acting like you're deaf and like you're blind, and that we start to see you for who you are. Jesus, we are so grateful for the exchange that has taken place, and we just want to live in that freedom. Amen.